Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 72. This episode we return to the Feldkirch plateau in Austria, where a small village is terrorised by a serial killer in A Pastoral Horror, first published in 1890. And here's Paul to set the scene.
Following the collapse of a city firm and the loss of his capital, John Hudson is forced to find an affordable place to live while he waits for legal restitution. He fixes upon the Austrian Tyrolean village of Laden, where he settles into a contented, if somewhat dull existence, enlivened to some extent by the presence of the intellectual village priest, Father Verhagen. This placid atmosphere, however, is shattered by the gruesome murder of one of the villagers. At first, the killing is blamed on an itinerant Italian pedlar, with whom the victim had quarrelled. But the police have to release their suspect when a second and more prominent villager is also murdered, and a reign of terror begins.
A Pastoral Horror is one of those stories that was written a long time before it was first published. We know for sure that it was written in early 1884, as Conan Doyle wrote to his mother on the 2nd of March to tell her that he'd just completed a story, which he was then calling The Man with the Mattock. A fine 30-page sensational hair raiser and vitality absorber, he said. Sent off to Cornhill tonight, will probably come back, but is sure of a berth somewhere. And indeed, it did come back. Another letter from around the same time, which was very recently uncovered by a friend of the podcast, Matt Hall, reveals that Conan Doyle hawked the story to Belgravia. In that undated letter to his friend Kate Bryson, Conan Doyle wrote, "I have the man with the mattock in Belgravia, a trifle more ghastly than the last." That last story actually being Our Midnight Visitor, which was another story which would take a long time to appear in print. In the end, it took 6 years before A Pastoral Horror appeared in print, and it's long been thought that it first appeared in the newspaper The People on the 21st of December 1890, but it actually appeared a day earlier in the special Christmas number of the Nottinghamshire Guardian. It's also often said that the story was printed anonymously, but both newspaper versions are credited to A. Conan Doyle, and indeed they appear under the disclaimer, "All rights reserved," above the headline, showing that Conan Doyle was clearly agitated about copyright infringement. But the difference between the time of writing the story and of publication is significant because it potentially shines a different light on the story if you just think of it being one that appeared in 1890. Being published in 1890 and a story that concerns a serial killer, it came out 2 years after the Jack the Ripper murders. So we might easily think it's a copycat or a cash-in. But in fact, we know that it was written 4 years before the Jack the Ripper case, in which case, do we have an example here of Conan Doyle conceiving of a serial killer story before the most infamous example of its kind occurred? The second reason it's significant, though, is because A Pastoral Horror is an early example of Conan Doyle, the crime writer. If we restore it to its place in the timeline as a tale written in 1884, then it suddenly becomes a forerunner of the Sherlock Holmes stories, not a follow-up. And so A Pastoral Horror becomes part of the story of Conan Doyle's emergence as a writer of crime and detective fiction. Whatever the case, though, the story was never anthologized, not even in the mammoth Conan Doyle stories in 1929, but it was included in the Gibson and Green Unknown Conan Doyle Uncollected Stories in 1982, and you can read it today on the ever wonderful Conan Doyle Encyclopedia Online.
And it has also been included in Darrell Jones's
Ah,
Gothic stories from the Oxford University Press.
yeah.
So it's a bit more available now. It's one of these that is a really interesting story to put within this context, the context
Mm,
you've been discussing there, and overlooked for many reasons. One, as you said, because it wasn't reprinted until 1982.
mm.
But also its place in crime fiction because it's called a pastoral horror.
Yes.
It's automatically pushed into the Gothic corner, which I mean it
Yeah.
belongs in there in many ways.
Yeah.
But as you say, it is an early crime story, and so it's again a good example of Conan Doyle, cross-pollinating genres,
Yes.
which he was so adept at, and it is a story that certainly deserves to be more widely known.
Yeah.
And on that point, before we start on our main discussion, I would just like to say to people, spoiler alert, we will be giving away, if you've not read the story, it's one of those where I would advise you to go off and read it before listening to the rest of what we have to say, because we will be giving away the essential plot points.
Very good. Very good point. So the story begins with a location that we are very familiar with, and Conan Doyle was certainly very familiar with because we've covered this before. This is the Feldkirch Plateau in Austria, and you'll remember from when we talked about this last in the episode on the Great Kindplatz experiment that Conan Doyle was a student at the Stella Matutina in Feldkirch, a Jesuit school, in the school year 1875-76. And so a lot of that personal experience, knowledge of the location, all feeds into this story. And we get an echo of Conan Doyle's immediate reactions to Falkirk in that wonderful opening paragraph of the story.
Yeah, it's extremely lyrical. It's
Mm,
far above the level of the Lake of Constance, nestling in a little corner of the Tyrolean Alps, lies the quiet town of Feldkirch. It is remarkable for nothing save the presence of a large and well-conducted Jesuit school, and for the extreme beauty of its situation. There is no more lovely spot in the Vorarlberg. From the hills which rise behind the town, the great lake glimmers some 15 miles off, like a broad sea of quicksilver. Down below in the plains, the Rhine and the Danube prattle along, flowing swiftly and merrily, with none of the dignity which they assume as they grow from brooks into rivers. 5 great countries or principalities, Switzerland, Austria, Baden, Württemberg, and Bavaria, are visible from the plateau of Feldkirch.
mm,
So Doyle was very taken with his first experience of the Alps.
mm.
And of course, the Alps would become quite important later in his life, and important in the life of his major character. But it is interesting if you go back to the letters that he was writing to his mother
Mm,
from Feldkirch at the time, and you can see in that he was very taken with the scenery, the history, and the romance of the region.
yeah.
But given that last the closing sentence of that opening paragraph, he actually you go back to the letters, you can see in one of the last letters he wrote to his mother from the region, he closes it with. From that mountain, I saw Baden, Austria, Switzerland, Bavaria, and Württemberg. So he's quoting
Yeah.
himself,
Quoting himself. Yeah.
but it shows that he was so taken with the experience of living in this beautiful landscape,
Yeah.
which stayed with him. I feel.
Yeah, well, he definitely came back to it in Memories and Adventures as well, didn't he? He
Mm,
said,
mm.
"I've always had a pleasant memory of the Austrian Jesuits and of that old school." And then he ascribed to it some restoration of his sympathy towards the Jesuits. He says, "Far as I have strayed from their paths, I see now both their limitations and their virtues." So there's something of a kind of rapprochement, or certainly after the fact, he looks back on this period of time in Falkirk rather fondly as being a time when he was on better terms with the Jesuits.
Yeah, you get the feeling he's not kicking against authority as much as he was at Stonyhurst. And he's also, he's 16, 17 at this point. So he's in that transitional phase, what to us is the sixth form phase
Yeah.
of life before he goes to university, and his ideas are maturing. And he's given a greater degree of freedom. The hearty outdoor side of Doyle
Yes.
comes out here. He got a shock when he first went there because how cold it was. even going from Lancashire and Edinburgh. But he soon he soon grew used to that and enjoyed this kind of hearty outdoor life that he was getting experience of.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that about kicking back against authority. There isn't a bit of evidence of him doing that in Feldkirch
Mm.
as well, because one of the things that we've got coming on the website very soon is an article by Philip Skirby, who's a German Doylean and has written an excellent article on what is believed to be Conan Doyle's first publication, in inverted commas, which is the Feldkirchian Gazette, a school magazine that he wrote with some of his friends. And that's a really interesting publication. There were only two issues, October and November 1875, so very soon after he arrived in Falkirk. And the second issue definitely has a tonal shift where you can sense that perhaps the school authorities were not so pleased with what he was doing, and so the second issue, the November issue, feels a bit shirty, really. Um, but it's worth having a read of that, and hopefully we'll be able to speak to Philip Scobie very soon about his article and post something as a bonus for patrons.
The other thing that he did expand while he was there, for obvious reasons, was his linguistic skills.
Mm,
And it's interesting with the character, the principal character in this story, the imaginatively named John Hudson. Where does Doyle get his names from? Um, because he's had to take up this temporary exile in Austria, but he makes a point that he could speak or had a smattering of German.
yeah.
And as he lives in Laden, his German improves.
Mm,
And this was also definitely the case with Conan Doyle. And again, in one of his letters to his mother, he says that he is progressing well in German. This is from March 1876. The German gets on very well. When I speak first, I naturally have adjectives in the feminine before neuter nouns and all that sort of thing. But I can always be easily be understood. And I have attained so much volubility that twice a week, when we have our walks, I can keep up an unbroken conversation for 3 hours with two Germans. For in a walk, we go in ranks three abreast, and an Englishman must always escort two Germans. So,
yeah.
yeah, if that's true, it's pretty impressive that you can keep this up for 3 hours. And
Yeah.
it's a, I think we've discussed this before, really. It is something that's often overlooked with Conan Doyle. The fact that he was conversant with German and French,
Yes.
and with the literatures of those countries, because again we have this view of Doyle, this we too easily fall into the stereotype
Mm,
of him being just English and an imperialist and so on, and whereas he did have an element of the internationalist about him, quite
oh, yes.
definitely, and that again comes from this is one of the benefits of the Jesuit education.
Yeah, well, one of the things that he'll be accused of later in life is being too sympathetic towards Germany in the lead up to the First World War, of course. I mean, in fact, the German language is probably the reason why he ended up in Falkirk in the first place, because it was his German tutor at Stonyhurst, Father Baumgartner,
Mhm.
who had been a both a pupil and a teacher at the Stella Matutina in Falkirk, who suggested that this would be a good place for Conan Doyle to go to brush up his German as well.
Mhm.
And in fact, Philip in his article goes into he has found a lot more about Father Baumgartner, who we suggested in the Great Keinplatz experiment episode was an influential figure. But I think Philip has kind of proven just how influential he was, which is great.
Mhm.
And so, in addition to Falkirk itself being something drawn from Conan Doyle's personal experience, you get another example here of a narrator, kind of
Mhm.
semi-autobiographical. Another, you said before, of course, he's got the wonderful name John Hudson. This is just before John Watson, so technically, I suppose Watson is is the derivative. Either way, Watson's far better than Ormond Sacker. Uh,
Perhaps the H stands for Hudson. John Hudson Watson.
well, there you go. Yeah, but he's an odd character. He's got elements of him which are quite Conan Doyle, but he is older. He's 47 years old. He seems to be independently wealthy, but on the verge of ruin because he's waiting for this insurance payout from this rather wonderfully named company, Springe, Wilkinson and Spragg, which sounds like something out of the Goon Show. But he's also spent 2 years at Guy's Hospital. He owns a Navy revolver. This sounds like a bit of a mashup of all sorts of different things going on here. But I was intrigued by the fact that he said that I was in a cynical humor with my fellow man and desired to see as little of him as possible for some time to come. Because we've seen this before. We've seen this, or we may see it again, depending on how you're looking at it. But there's James Upperton in Gast of Fell. He expresses a very similar sentiment. But
It's definitely there in the Man from Archangel,
oh yes,
John McVitie, who's very bitter. He's far worse than Hudson,
yeah.
in his dislike of the human race. And there's a degree of that as well in Hammond in that little square box. And in a different form later on, Sir John Bollamore in the Japanned box.
Oh yeah.
These are all men who've turned their back on their fellow man. But what you do get a lot of that, it does sound petulant a lot of
Yeah,
the
it
time,
does.
because this is the younger Doyle, there's that sort of there's almost an overgrown adolescent feel
Yeah, there
to
is.
these characters, and it becomes more refined, obviously, with Sherlock Holmes,
Yes.
who has an element of this in him, but he's far more rounded. But
Yes.
that definitely is part of his makeup. But these early characters, it's again Doyle experimenting with a character type and having fun
Yes.
with a character type. But because Doyle himself obviously could be very fun, effusive character,
Mm.
and just likes to put himself as narrator into the skins of these people who are misanthropic.
Yes.
But then he again doesn't always do it that well, because we have with John Hudson talking about, the reason he's in Austria is recommended by a friend.
Yeah.
And then he becomes friendly with the villagers and becomes a leading light in the village. So yeah,
Yeah.
it
And
doesn't always convince.
no, it's not. It's not. It's definitely, as we've said before, apprentice work, isn't it? Because there are quite a few holes in this. I also found the description, his physical description, somewhat out of kilter. He's described as the manners and customs of the red-bearded Englander, his long walks, his check suit, and the reasons which had led him to abandon his fatherland were all fruitful sources of gossip among the locals. So, not quite. It doesn't quite fit.
No,
So,
I mean, you
it's
think straight away this is a red beard and a loud check suit. It's not how to blend in.
it's not, is it? No, no. And Hudson seems to have picked a real pearler of a time to go to Austria because it's in the middle of a war. So this is an important bit of context which can quickly, can fly over your head now. But essentially, this story is set in May, June 1866, which is amid the Austro-Prussian War, also known as the Seven Weeks' War. And this was essentially the conflict to try to answer what was called the German question, whether Germany would include Austria and be the kind of greater Germany, or it would settle around Prussia, the lesser Germany. And Austria looked on paper like it was going to be the stronger of the two powers. But Prussia had allied with Italy, which meant that Austria had to fight on two fronts. And also, Prussia had industrialized incredibly rapidly over the previous decades, and so was both technologically and indeed militarily stronger. And so this short conflict came to an end with the Battle of Königgrätz at Sadowa, which is what's referenced in the story by Hudson, on the 3rd of July 1866, where the Prussians inflicted a crushing defeat on the Austrians. And the subsequent Peace of Prague essentially excluded Austria from German affairs. And so this is all of the setup to the old German Confederation being dissolved, Prussia annexing certain Austrian states and friendly countries, and the unification ultimately of Germany and the proclamation of the German Empire in 1870-71. So all of this is happening. And in fact, some of that context is really important in the relationships between the characters, because there is, as you mentioned at the beginning, Paul, at a moment where there is one of the Austrian locals and one of the Italian peddlers are reported to have had a significant argument, and one can easily interpret that as being something around this war, since Austria and Italy found themselves on opposing sides.
Yeah, and in that context, this is the settling of European affairs, which would come to a head in 1870-71 with the Franco-Prussian War.
Yeah,
This was the war, as you've said, to establish Prussian supremacy in the German-speaking world.
yeah,
And then the Franco-Prussian War was Prussia showing its ascendancy over mainland continental Europe.
mm,
And obviously, a lot of the problems of the 20th century would come in the slipstream of that. Um, but it's fascinating as well to see how Doyle was obviously keeping an eye
yeah,
on European affairs. And again, this experience of Feldkirch would give him a more open eye to looking at Europe as a continent rather than looking from the Anglo-centric viewpoint. So you get elements of that in Doyle's stories at this time. We mentioned Surgeon of Gastafel, where
mm,
Upperton in that is been essentially been a mercenary.
yes, yeah,
And he's fought in the American Civil War during Jackson's Shenandoah Valley campaign. He's also been with Garibaldi's Red Shirts in
yeah,
the unification of Italy, the wars of Italy, which were also going on in this period. So it
mm,
is this resettling of the European order. And as you said, Doyle is using this wider context to bring it into little arguments in this little tiny village and show you how it affects even the smallest of places can
yeah.
be affected by these major events.
Mm. So this disagreement between this Austrian character and this Italian character is something that ultimately feeds into an incident that shakes the entire village, and that's the murder of the Austrian who was involved in that argument, a chap by the name of Maul.
Mm.
Um, Maul's found murdered on the 19th of May, 1866, struck on the back of the head with with an instrument that, at that time, it's quite hard to tell what it is, but Father Verhagen suggests that this may be a mattock, in other words, a small pickaxe, such as are found in every alpine cottage, we're told. And one of the locals there takes a turnip, gets a mattock, and smashes it into the back, and then handily shows that the impression formed is the same. But this is a good bit of example of where this fits as a kind of forensic crime novel as well. We start to get some stuff here of Conan Doyle describing the crime scene, describing the body, the layout, and this goes well before the creation of Sherlock Holmes. It's not entirely successful, it has to be said. I think Conan Doyle does a strange job of describing things in quite inconsistent ways. So he says, Maul lay upon his face with his fingers dug into the earth, no doubt in his last convulsive struggles. And then they turn him over and they say, Maul's face was perfectly placid, showing that he had no thought of danger until the fatal blow was struck. So I don't think both those things can be true. But so, again, Prentice work, isn't it? This is
Mm.
him playing around and learning his craft, but getting it slightly wrong in that instance.
And again, with that, we said that with the placid face, it doesn't go with the fact that he's supposed to have had this argument
Yes, quite.
with the Italian earlier, and it's something that stood out in the village because I think earlier Hudson says the main thing you would see in this village up until about 10 o'clock was maybe a couple of the local lads who've been on the beer a bit, and that was about as exciting as it got. So this thing coming out of the blue, that kind of it doesn't quite fit, but it's on the way, and obviously Doyle at this point will be familiar with early detective work, and we know it's in his school days he was becoming familiar with Edgar Allan Poe,
Hmm.
and he would be familiar with Wilkie Collins. I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting this story as a kind of proto detective story, even though we don't have a proper detective per se in it.
Mm.
It's an early whodunit.
Yes, it is.
as well, which obviously is the Moonstone was one of the real pioneers in that sort of fiction. But Doyle is he's playing about with those ideas here, and trying to work out possibly a new way of writing fiction.
Yeah.
And there is one point which struck me, and when they're speculating about who could this
Mm,
have been, and when they're unsure about who the murderer could be, he is either some murderous misanthrope who has declared a vendetta against the whole human race. And I just wonder, is this Doyle trying to be very clever because he's already established Hudson as a misanthrope?
mm,
Is he toying with the idea? Is the narrator the murderer?
mm.
Way before Agatha Christie
Wow.
actually used that idea. Maybe he thought of that as an idea, or maybe he just thought, is this something I will try and wrong foot the reader here if they spot that. Whether it's I don't know, but it's
It's a great
interesting that
idea.
that's in there. And
Mm.
then the other opportunity, or is he an escaped maniac? We then go back into we go from somewhere which might be going in a very clever direction back to the usual gothic tropes and so on. Oh, he must be an escaped lunatic.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, we also go in a not very clever direction with the naming of the Austrian victim as
Oh
well.
yes, the maul, yes, and which is of course it's a hammer.
Yes, it's a
So
hammer.
it's in all likelihood this is Doyle playing with words, and it was actually the maul was the weapon used in one of Britain's or the early 19th century's most famous murder cases with I think it's John Williamson, the Ratcliffe Highway murder,
Yes.
when a whole
Yeah.
family was slaughtered with a maul. So again, maybe that's in Doyle's mind.
Well, yeah, there might be a
Mm.
connection again in actually in the next murder because this is it doesn't stop there. Cellini, the Italian peddler who had the argument with Maul, is immediately arrested and put in custody. And this seems to have settled the village populace, although Father Verhagen seems to have been considerably stirred by recent events because he complains to Hudson that he's not terribly well. He's hands trembling and his face is pale. Um, but Cellini then is revealed to not be the murderer almost immediately afterwards because we then get a second murder, and this is the murder of Freckler of the
Mm.
post office, and he's now been found murdered in with exactly the same modus operandi as well. This time, though, we get a bit more information. He'd met his death by an exactly similar wound to that which had proved fatal to Maul, save that in this instance the injury was in front. His hands were clenched, and there was an indescribable look of horror, and as it seemed to me, of surprise upon his features. And here we get a bit more of that kind of police procedural, I
Mm.
suppose. So, in addition to those comments on the expression of the dead man, there's the blurred outline of footprints on the
Mm.
stairs, by which they discover that the killer had bounded up three at a time, showing with what fiendish swiftness this human tiger had rushed upstairs in search of his victim. But they also reveal that there's a considerable sum of money still there, not been taken. And then the local intendant points out that the dead man's rigid right arm was stretched out as if in greeting, and that therefore it was probable that this late visitor was someone with whom Freckler was well acquainted. And it's funny that you should say that thing about the Ratcliffe Highway murders, because one of the other detective or crime fiction tropes that we find in this story is that Freckler's time of death can be established by a broken cuckoo
Mm.
clock at the scene. It would have to be a cuckoo clock, wouldn't it? but uh, and this is something that I kind of associated this with the 1920s and 30s, the golden age detective story, the broken watch at the scene of the crime. But I was looking into it to try and find what the earliest example of this was in fiction, and I couldn't really find a very early one. But it does seem that they have real world origins in that in 1867 in California, there was a chap called Joseph Humphrey who was found murdered, and his time of death was established by his broken silver watch, which showed a time of 11 p.m. And he was killed with a hammer. So there you go. Maybe there's more connections here than
Mm.
you think.
Oh yeah, I mean we know that Doyle did have an interest in true crime.
Mm,
So if you're looking at where his stories appeared as well, I mean you pointed out that this one first appeared in a local Nottinghamshire paper.
newspaper. Mm,
So that there's lots of stories will be surrounding the fiction. It's a very different way. We these days we don't tend to see fiction in newspapers, but it was a common thing then.
yeah,
So you'd get the stories and then around them the news stories, and I'm sure Doyle will be drawn to stories like that, and including international stories would appear in just little local papers from agencies.
yeah, yeah,
So there's every likelihood that Doyle could have read of the story you just mentioned.
yeah.
We've also with this murder, you've got two more of the tropes or cliches of detective and crime fiction coming in. One is the innocent man is in prison when the second murder, so therefore
Yes.
that's him cleared. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a common one. And then obviously the one about the victim knowing the murderer.
Yes. Yeah.
But again, as you've said, it's clumsily done here because why would this person be bounding up the stairs three at a time rather than just knocking on the door? And so again, there's it's a style of fiction. As we've said, Doyle is working his way round it, and this is on the way to Holmes and beginning to really understand the mechanics and what works and what
Yeah.
doesn't. And unfortunately, I couldn't help laughing, as the fact it's a cuckoo clock. Just you can see a comedy moment straight away as the murder is accompanied by the cuckoo. It's hardly
Uh,
gothic.
it's hardly gothic, yeah. But he's busy laying the breadcrumbs for this particular mystery, and
Mm.
anyway, it shakes the life of the village now because they thought they'd got the they thought they'd got the foreigner wrapped up, and now they haven't.
Mm.
So they're all terrified. And Hudson tries to keep himself calm by reading Gordon's translation of Tacitus, which well, if it doesn't do him anything else, it'll put him to sleep. So we've got this is building quite nicely actually
Mm.
in terms of a kind of mystery now. And then you get probably my favorite bit of the whole story, which is this what we might call the near miss.
And it's a brilliantly written moment in
Yeah.
in the woods surrounding the village, and
Mm.
this is where Doyle is beginning to master his art,
Yeah.
because the tension and sense of tension is fantastic. Where I think it's a woodsman on his way home, and this strange figure comes along with masked, and and then he goes to ground, knowing that this is a dangerous figure. The air of tension is superb. It reminded me. It's a different genre, but it's like the Black Riders moment in the Fellowship of the Ring of that
Yes.
will they be found?
Yeah.
And it's just this is Doyle on his way. You can see this is a great writer.
Yeah.
Is on his way. For all the other the hiccups in the story, this is one of those moments where you think, yeah, this he is mastering the art.
It is really good, and
Mm,
the fact that this figure is wrapped up. He describes that he has a long mattock,
mm.
so this long pickaxe that he is then kind of swishing through the bushes because he knows that this individual is in there somewhere. This feels like a horror movie. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
this,
it is very filmic,
yeah,
and that's why in a way it does remind me of that moment from the Fellowship. It's that you
yeah,
can see a good director, and this
yeah,
could be stretched out
yes,
on film
definitely,
quite easily, and the tension rise, and it also really gives the murder a sense of reality.
yeah, it does,
But we still have no clue as to identity. But it's done in a way which it is cliched, but it's done very cleverly.
So inevitably, the village has lulled itself into a false sense of security because we now get to what we might call, borrowing from Jack the Ripper, the double event,
Mm,
because we have two crimes take place on the same night, and this is told in a really interesting way. So Hudson goes to visit Father Verhagen, but finds that he's gone out, and as he's waiting in the cure's rooms for him to return, he sees an ominous face at the window, and fires his gun at the man, who quickly escapes. And when Hudson then goes in search of that individual, he discovers that a short time earlier, this fiend had already made an attempt on the life of Frau Bischoff at the Grunemann public house. That's a rather original name, isn't it? The Grunemann
mm,
public house. And this chap was injured. His wrist was injured in the process. But the thing that's quite nice about this is that Conan Doyle tells these events out of sequence. So you get the sense that this murderer's blood was up in a way that is actually deeply reminiscent of the double event in the Jack the Ripper case.
It's strangely it's obviously very different, but strangely reminiscent as
Mm,
well of what was going to happen in real life. But within the terms of the story itself, it's interesting in that it's ramping it up because this is the first
yeah,
time he's attacked a woman, and it's the woman who fights him off.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point.
Which is interesting as well. So we've then got he flees into the woods, which is where the cure's house is, an isolated location, and obviously has no idea that there's a gun-toting Englishman inside the house who shoots before he asks questions.
Indeed, yes. Well, there is that. Yeah.
But yes, it then raises that level, and you actually know when something like this is happening in a story, we are coming towards the climax.
Yeah.
It can't go on like this. But the climax actually comes in a very odd way. It's very dramatic, but not dramatic in the way that perhaps the reader would be expecting.
Yeah. So this is 4th of June. A Thanksgiving service is held for the escape of the cure and Frau Bischoff from this murderer. And Father Verhagen is giving is said to be an eloquent preacher, but on that occasion he surpassed himself. He
Mm,
chose for his text, "In the midst of life we are in death," and impressed so vividly upon our minds the thin veil which divides us from eternity, and how unexpectedly it may be rent, that he held his audience spellbound and horrified. And then he raises his hand to give the blessing, and we get this moment. The summer sunshine shining slantwise through the single small stained glass window which adorned the little church threw a yellow lustre upon his sharp intellectual features with their dark haggard lines, while a vivid crimson spot, reflected from a ruby-coloured mantle in the window, quivered over his uplifted right hand. And at that moment we realise that Father
mm,
Verhagen has the injured wrist, and so we now have our murderer. And it's a beautifully done moment, isn't it? It's a
Oh,
fantastic bit of drama.
it's great. I mean, you've got Frau Bischoff in there where she screams, I think screams and faints
Yeah,
at realizing who she's looking at. And you also had this, I mean, it's an enormously symbolic moment, of course, where you've got the red, yeah, the man with blood on his hands is revealed,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's kind of the symbolic blood, and we know he's got real blood on his hands at this point. Again, we are in the territory of who don't least likely suspect.
Yes.
So another detective fiction cliche, probably early example.
But it's
So,
beautifully done, isn't it, as well? I
mm,
mean, I think the thing is that the imagery is so strong, this idea
mm,
that the priest raises his hand and at that point you see the injured wrist. I do wonder if that is the central idea of the image that Conan Doyle had in his head and and the story flowed from it because it's such a perfect culmination of the tale. Um, and the stained glass, the light coming through. Thank goodness it wasn't adapted by the Granada TV Sherlock Holmes series, because Peter Hammond, who always shot everything through mirrors or stained glass, would have
Mm.
had an absolute field day
He'd
with
have
this
loved
moment.
it.
He would have absolutely loved it. But
Uh,
it's such a great moment. It's such a brilliant moment.
and it is so doused in religious imagery,
Yeah.
the raised hands, and as I said, the light on the hand is clearly meant to symbolize blood on the hand, but it also is this sort of is it a stigmata
Yeah, stigmata. Yeah,
idea as
that's
well, and the
yeah.
same with the damaged wrist. Is that what's going on here? Because
Mm.
Doyle is thinking back to his school days. He's thinking back to his Feldkirch days, which are going to be into this very, very Catholic atmosphere.
Mm.
It's gone in deep as is intended by the education. And I agree with you. I think this is a story that's been worked out backwards. Yeah,
Mm.
it's quite a really dramatic idea for the time to have the priest unmasked as the murderer. It's quite a daring thing
Yeah.
to
I,
actually do in this sort of story.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 points about that. One of them is that this feels in a way like Conan Doyle processing that rift he was experiencing with his the Catholic side of his family, that tension of his own beliefs and where they sat. If you think about 1884, you're thinking about he's had the rift with the Doyle family in
Hmm.
London. And then think about that Memories and Adventures quote I gave at the beginning, where he talks about this being a period of his life where there's almost a kind of rapprochement with the Jesuits as well. There's something about Feldkirch, there's something about this time in his life where he is working through the relationship that he has with his Catholicism. And I think, as you've said previously, I think Conan Doyle, in a way, spends the rest of his life trying to replace or to balance, find some balance in his religious beliefs that he lost by abandoning Catholicism.
And when you come back to that, he always says, and I think it is in Memories and Adventures where he talks about Father Murphy, this great
Hmm.
beefy Irish priest who lectured. It was the kind of hellfire and brimstone
Yes.
approach, and that put Doyle off
Yeah.
completely. It had the opposite effect to the one intended. This is what's really interesting with this character. We haven't really discussed Father Hagen,
Yes.
and yet his we Hudson. He's the one that Hudson takes to immediately. Partly because there's another aspect of Hudson's character is the snob, and
Yes.
because Verhagen is an intellectual. And his description of him of the father is that he's little more than 40 years of age, had made his reputation as an author by a brilliant monograph upon the early popes. I shrewdly suspect that it was owing to some rather unorthodox views advanced in this book that Verhagen was relegated to the obscurity of Laden. His opinions upon every subject were ultra-liberal, and in his fiery youth he had been ready to vindicate them, as was proved by a deep scar across his chin, received from a dragoon's sabre in the abortive insurrection in Berlin. So we've got that side of his youth. Yeah,
Mm.
it's odd that he's ended up as a priest, really.
But the interesting thing about that is that does actually mirror something in Father Baumgartner's past
Mm,
as well. He got into trouble for some early publications, and then he eventually went into the church and became one of the great thinkers. He
mm,
was recognized as the church's great authority on literature, and in fact, he was nominated 3 times for the Nobel Prize for Literature for his history of
mm,
Western literature, which he anticipated writing 10 volumes, but he died after completing the sixth.
mm.
Um, but um, but yeah, there's that hint there, isn't there, that Verhagen's been involved in what the revolutions of 1848
Yeah,
probably, and
which again puts it's a degree of historical context.
yeah,
So we know this is almost 20 years earlier that he's been a fiery youth. But he's obviously got that side to his character. And again, this is Doyle laying the ground because we know that he's capable.
Yes, absolutely.
of a degree of violence it is there. And there's also, I mean, another side to the Feldkirch experience, which Owen Dudley Edwards talks about a lot, is this is young Doyle's exposure to German Romanticism
Yes.
is coming to the fore here as well, and he's finding his way around that sort of that side of the German character,
Hmm.
which is very different to the kind of the stern authoritarian discipline side.
Yeah.
And this ties into, the wars of liberation from Napoleon earlier
Yes.
in the
Yes.
century. And you've got that reflected in one of the Brigadier Gerard stories, how the Brigadier played for a kingdom, where Brigadier Gerard meets one of the great early German romantic poets, Theodor Kerner,
Mm.
and actually sees Kerner sing a song to an assemblage of patriots. So this is Doyle is really taking this on board, and he's put this into the father here. For all some of the faults we picked with this story, it is interesting that he's got this character. He's made the character rich,
Yes.
and really he's going out of his way in one way to do the least likely suspect. And I think we also have to remember at this point in the whole history of the detective genre, the audience at the time wouldn't be quite so sophisticated as we
Uh,
are now and used to this sort of thing.
absolutely.
So we look at this story and say, oh, it's obvious who it is.
Yeah, that's right.
But I don't think quite so much, because he could have introduced a character. He could have introduced a character who's not been in the story before.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily spelt out that this is a whodunit.
No.
So it would be unfair to criticize him on those lines. And we've also, I mean, he does try and hide the character as well in saying he's somewhat cold and reserved.
Yes.
So that,
Yeah.
that's his attempt to disguise again. This is the sort of character he shows to the world. So it's got to be looked at in those sort of lights, I think.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, the tropes are still forming at this point. In fact,
Mm,
what's so really interesting about seeing this not as a 1890 serial killer, but seeing it as an 1884 crime and
mm.
detective story is that it's written at a pivotal moment in both Conan Doyle's career, but also, before really crime and detective fiction has fully formed.
Yeah,
Um,
it's where you're still getting this mix of the mystery and gothic
yeah,
genres thrown in there, and Poe had tried to take it in a certain direction. Wilkie Collins had tried to take it in a certain direction, but you've still got the elements of mystery fiction, sensational fiction. This isn't a pure detective or crime story by any means. I mean, the title, as we pointed out, Pastoral Horror, doesn't indicate that that's what we're going to get, and there is this mistaken idea that it's a werewolf story, which it certainly isn't.
yeah,
You get the speculation on the murderer uses the word vampire
yes,
at one point, but it's not meant in a literal sense. It's
yes,
just the kind of when in these sort of communities where they're reaching for examples, they'll turn to the supernatural because it does seem supernatural. How can the killer
yeah,
be getting away? How can he be doing this and
yeah,
not
yeah,
be
yeah.
spotted and not be caught?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's quite a lot of discussion, isn't there, about this idea that it could be a werewolf, and
Mm,
in the secondary literature, and it just doesn't
no.
figure for me at all. I just don't see it. And in the way that you've just described with the vampire, we've got other examples. I think in The Winning Shot, Octavius Gaster is
Mm,
described as 5 or 6 different types of monsters, and I think people became rather fixated on this idea that Father Verhagen is described as having lucid intervals between his fits. But there's none of that kind of the stuff that even at this time in the 1880s is associated with werewolf fiction.
mm,
Things like, Full Moon and all that kind of stuff.
mm.
There isn't any of that in here at all. In fact,
But
the
also,
absence of light is a really important point in this story.
yes, so
That
he gets
actually
away
you
with
don't
half
see
of
it.
it.
Exactly. He doesn't
Mm,
get he
mm.
doesn't get spotted. Yeah.
And it's telling there that you mentioned the example of the winning shot and Octavius Gaster.
Mm.
In that phrase that Doyle uses in that letter to his mother, he calls it a vitality absorber, which
Yes.
is a very strange phrase. It's an odd
Yeah.
phrase. I still I can't work out exactly what he means by that. But that's the sort of character that the kind of the energy vampire, essentially,
Yeah,
which is what Gaster is in many ways. But you look at this story and that's not what's going on.
no.
So I don't know whether he means. I
Well,
presume he's not meaning his reader's vitality is being absorbed.
well, I think he might be meaning it in the same way as he did in John Barrington Cowles, because that's written in
Mm,
the same year, isn't it? 1884.
mm,
So,
mm,
like a parasitic entity, I suppose.
mm, mm,
And I suppose in this instance, Verhagen is almost a parasite on the village as well. But you take that year, 1880, 1884, and the years either side of it. Conan Doyle's writing quite a lot of stuff at this point that
mm,
is of a type that has multiple murders in it. You have the year before you have the Silver Hatchet.
mm.
We've then had in 1884 we've got the Bloodstone tragedy we covered previously, and John Barrington Cowles. And now the Silver Hatchet is a bit of an unusual one because that's a cursed object as opposed to a serial killer.
But it ties it. I don't know whether it's in a way him trying out ideas.
Yeah.
Because that is more you're in more the realms of folk tale fairy story almost with it being the object.
Yes.
It's clearly another German story, even though it's set in Budapest. Lots of the characters are German, have German names. It's clearly a German story. And
Yeah.
then after this one, we get the Great Kindplatz experiment,
Mm.
another supernatural German story.
Mm. Mm.
So you've got he's obviously thinking of his Feldkirch experience as well a lot at this time.
Yes. But they do have kind of folkloric aspects to them as
Mm,
well, don't
mm,
they? They have that
mm,
kind of fairy tale quality to them as well. I mean, as a kind of, if you think about this briefly as a kind of serial killer story,
mm,
we said at the beginning that this came out in 1890, 2 years after the Jack the Ripper case. The fact that it was written in 1884, we know that it was it was written before, but that might well be something of the explanation as to why the story languished so long without a publisher. I mean, maybe this idea of a preacher who is a serial murderer was unacceptable in 1884 in a way that actually it probably wasn't in 1890, because by 1890, you've had all sorts of ridiculous theories about, psychopathic royals or um, surgeons or,
mm, mm.
murdering midwives or all of the theories that came out over the Ripper murders. So maybe it was that it wasn't acceptable to be published in 1884, but by 1890, the context had changed.
Yeah, and it's one where it would be very interesting to have a look at the manuscript or manuscripts.
Mm,
Um, did he rework it? Had it sat around? Did publishers? Oh, we've got this story that fits in with kind of the mood at the moment.
yeah.
Or did Conan Doyle rework and resubmit it?
Yes.
Um, so we don't know exactly what's going
No.
on here. So are the ripperish element is it kind of almost strangely forecasting?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or has he reworked it? We know he's definitely retitled it.
Yes.
But that's all we do know. But it's quite astonishing that there is this almost connection and theories about the murders in the story that the characters are making, and you got this thing. On the occasion of the attempt on Frau Bischoff, he had made a dash for home, and then, finding to his astonishment that his room was occupied, his only resource was to fling away his weapon and muffler and to mix with the crowd in the village. Being both a strong and an active man, with a good knowledge of the footpaths through the woods, he never found any difficulty in escaping all observation. This is
Mm,
at the time of the Ripper killings, this is what was
mm,
theorized that
yeah.
the more sensible theories are that he's a local man
Mm,
who's able to blend in with the general surroundings, and he's able to find his way through the warrens of streets
yes.
in the East End, and this is exactly what's going on with Father Verhagen. And once he is captured, we then find out that he's suffering from some mental aberration
Yeah.
and has these moments. Again, this is the kind of one of the main theories about the Ripper was he somebody
Yes.
who did suffer these kind of brain collapses, as it were. And after Verhagen's apprehension, immediately after his apprehension, Verhagen's disease took an acute form as he was carried off to the lunatic asylum at Feldkirch. I've heard that some months afterwards he made a determined attempt upon the life of one of his keepers and
Mm,
afterwards committed suicide.
mm,
This is again very like some of the Ripper theorizing,
yeah.
that he must have reached a certain point and then his brain completely collapsed and insanity took over. And in the end, suicide is the option that's taken. This
Yeah.
surrounds one of the main Ripper suspects, Montague John Druitt. It fits his case and the way
Yeah.
this is done. So is it if this is a story from 1884 that hasn't been tampered with, it's actually quite astonishing.
Well, yeah, another way in which it's astonishing is I think maybe only a doctor could come up with that kind of theory
Mm,
for a serial killer. If you think about forerunner serial killer stories, because this is not the first, the earlier serial killers have a reason for doing things.
mm,
So there are two big examples that often get quoted. One of them is E.T.A. Hoffman's story, Mademoiselle de Scuderi, which is a sort of kind of crime story. It's often regarded as one of the first crime novels written in 1819, and that concerns a master goldsmith and jeweler who is so obsessed with his creations that he murders his clients to get them back.
mm,
And the other one, of course, everybody will be familiar with is Sweeney Todd in the Penny Dreadfuls in the 1840s. But in both of those cases, people have a reason for doing. But actually, what you're talking about here is something that is almost like a brain fog that comes over Verhagen. It's something that is
mm.
out of his control. And I think that speaks to what really is going on in here, which I think there's so much of his father in
Oh
this
yes.
story. Yeah.
I mean, this is the time his father is really beginning his descent.
Yeah.
At exactly the time that Doyle is in Feldkirch,
Yeah.
and it's the year his father loses his job. The reason the Edinburgh Corporation used about it was that they were doing a reorganisation,
Yeah.
and he wasn't needed anymore. But he obviously he was having a lot of problems with the alcoholism already
Yes.
at this stage. He'll have been, and it will have been affecting his work.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much Arthur had noticed this, because obviously he's been away at Stonyhurst and then he's at Falkirk, so he's not at home a lot. And he wrote part of the letter he wrote to his mother from Falkirk in April 1876. He's obviously been informed about his father's early retirement. And he says, I was indeed surprised and sorry to hear that Papa is leaving the office. Has he been unwell? Or is there any other particular reason for it? So he's obviously kept a bit in the dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
He'll have seen certain patterns of behavior.
Yeah.
But that's all going on in the background here. And so you've got this family character who's almost of a double nature. You've got this story was written 8 years after Falkirk,
Yeah.
when Arthur is a doctor, and he'll have a far greater idea, obviously, of what his father's problems were. And is this a sort of have sympathy on my father element
Yes.
coming in, because Verhagen is never portrayed as a villain.
No, he's not.
It's out of his control.
It is.
He's a sympathetic character
Yeah.
for most of the story, and he's not depicted as a hypocrite
No.
at
No.
any
No. No.
point.
He's not.
Even when
Not
he's
at all.
doing the service at the end, he is not depicted in that sort of way. It's almost like he doesn't know what he's doing when he has these fits upon him, and that would tie in very much with the way that Arthur would try and rationalize
Yeah.
about his own father's condition. I'm quite sure.
Yeah. And there's another ominous connection there, which is that I think it would have been after the time of writing, but certainly before the publication. One of the reasons that Charles Doyle has moved from one institution to another is that he attacked someone.
Mm,
And again, it is regarded. The medical record shows it's regarded as being out of his character, but it means that he can no longer be cared for in that institution, and he
mm,
has to move to a more intensively supported one,
mm,
which is, a sad thing to feel that might have been reflected in here, even if it accidentally.
But I'm quite sure there's an element of that entering into the story, as well as all the other things that he's working out some of his feelings about the Jesuits
Yeah.
at the same time, and that will probably inevitably also have brought thoughts to his father, because his father remained a staunch Catholic
Yes, quite.
to the end of his life.
Yeah. Yeah. Very autobiographical, I think, in
Mm,
its
mm.
own way. So, final thoughts on this one, Paul. How do you think this one ranks?
I think it's a fascinating story, and I really enjoyed it.
Mm,
Yeah, you can see its faults, you can see its cliche, but it is pointing the way to Sherlock Holmes. It's a curious story in that it's got elements almost of folk tale, but then you've got the modern elements where the murderer is mentally ill.
yes.
There is no supernatural element, which is what makes this so interesting, and it is. It's a shame it wasn't reprinted for so long, really.
Yeah.
It's a story that I would say to anybody with an interest in Doyle, read it,
Yes.
quite definitely, because you will see it as part of the path, and he's a damn good storyteller as ever,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's recommended.
It feels to me very reminiscent of the kind of early movies that Hammer made in a strange
Mm-mm,
kind of way. This kind of generic Central European
mm,
location with this string of murders, because it is on that cusp of being, both a horror and a detective, and it moves at a terrific pace.
mm.
And I think the fact that you get, Murder One, Murder Two, double event finale, you get it progresses in a way that actually is very, very modern.
It's just, I mean, the other thing where it just stands on this cusp line, the 1880s generally, where fiction is popular fiction is changing, and you've got this is just before Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes.
So the ideas are in the air quite definitely amongst scientists and amongst artists and writers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're going to get the classic example is published 2 years after this is written,
Yes.
which could have been another thing that encouraged it to be published in
Yes. Good
1890.
point.
That there's this wave of stories coming of
Yeah.
of this kind.
Yeah. Father Verhagen
Mm,
being another of those Doyle doubles of
mm, mm,
wonderful stuff.
mm.
So that brings us to the end of this episode. If you want to find out more, you can find the show notes at doingsofdoyle.com and check out how you can become a supporter or a patron of the show through PayPal or through Patreon. So, Paul, what are we going to be looking at next month?
Very different territory. We're going to go into the world of the military and examine a regimental scandal.
Brilliant. So, until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Down below in the plains, the Rhine and the Danube paddle along, flowing. God, sorry. Down below in the plains, the Rhine and the Danube paddle along.
Sorry, you have to do it again because you laughed in the middle of that line. Then sorry.
I love that prattling away,
That
but
could be us. That could be us.
This film is a detective story in which you are the detective. The question is not who is the murderer, but who is the werewolf.